Okay, some of these questions will be old hat to you when you've probably taken part in developing the program here, but we'll go through the
that's
the
fine.
list. So how and why did you become involved in cult-related issues?
Well, my involvement in cult-related issues is a little bit different than many people here. Because many people here have had a direct experience of being in a cultic group. I don't have that. Or they've had a relative. I had a relative in a cult. In fact, I still have relatives in a cult, but it came afterwards. What drove me to work is, as a Jewish person, I wanted to understand the Nazis and the Holocaust. And I consider them to be the ultimate cult, because you had a whole society full of ordinary people doing absolute acts of atrocity. How could that happen? So this really fascinated me as a young psychology student. And I entered this field first through research. So I did a research study about the effect of group pressure in getting people to say anti-Semitic things. This is probably a study that would not be acceptable in today's more ethical climate. It was before ethical boards, where you could do really interesting things, and I was influenced by other controversial studies in setting this up. But I really wanted to understand the ordinary person. I was more interested in them than even the leaders, like a cult leader. How did people get followers like that and distort them? How did people go to concentration camps during the day and come home at night and laugh with their family? I don't get that. So I wanted to understand that, and I wanted to understand how prejudice grows, which is that us versus them mentality that we see in cultic groups. But in the meantime, I was developing my clinical skills as a future clinical psychologist. So I'd only been in practice like a couple of years, literally, like 2 years, when I was interested in cults, but I also saw not much was being done to help people, especially family members for whom I have a lot of feeling for family members that are concerned about a loved one who suddenly is estranged from them or estranged with them, you could say. So I met other people who were also mental health professionals who were also interested in this work. And we talked for about a year, and in 1983, we set up RETIRN in Philadelphia, the Reentry Therapy Information and Referral Network, which we purposely misspelled as RETIRN. So we were thinking about people's returning back into the society that they'd left, really to be part of a very highly controlling group. But we also wanted it to be a team approach. We felt these were complicated issues. People need a lot of help on different levels in their recovery, and we wouldn't be able to do it all. So we had a referral network was an important part of it. But also, the thing that makes it different from other types of clinical psychology practice is the need for psychoeducation, and that's that I in return, the information. So a really important part was helping people that have been in groups to be able to process their experiences, to understand what happened to them, why they've done different things and maybe were against their values, but also to help families, because families were mystified and angry. Because maybe the person in the group or under undue influence from somebody said negative things about the families. They reinterpret people's histories. Suddenly everything was terrible in their childhoods and things like that. So family members rightfully would feel hurt and upset and get angry. But if you educate a family to understand how people can be influenced to think things in a rational way, to say things that are against their values, to reinterpret things, if they understand that deeply, they can help their loved one much more effectively, because now they're no longer personally hurt and upset about it. They can think more clearly and come up with some kind of logical way to get through to their child or loved one, partner, whoever it might be. So that was really important. So we felt it was a specialist type of mental health work. And we did talk since 1982, but in 1983, we gave a presentation to the Pennsylvania Psychological Association. And it was called, I still remember, Counseling for ex-cultists, a new specialty, ? And we addressed that question. And I've been pitching this to my colleagues ever since. You want to help people, you need to learn about the specifics of this. It's different from other work. You cannot be as neutral about people's choices. It is up to people whether or not they're in a group or a bad relationship, how they're going to come out. They're not going to come out, but at the same time, you're not quite as neutral as when a person says to me, should I explore my relationship with this person or that person? Should I become a doctor or a nurse? It's up to you. I don't really have a strong opinion about it, but I have a strong opinion when I see that people's human rights are being violated. So then you have to try to help people to look more closely and honestly. So you can say to someone who's essentially working for no money or next to no money, so slave labor for a purpose of the group, you can say to them, what happens when you have a health problem? Do you have anyone helping to pay for your medical expenses? So you can put that question in a neutral and supportive way that might make a person question, why don't I have any benefits? Why am I working 7 days a week? So it's that kind of thing. So pointing things out, but without shaming a person. So I was interested as a Jewish person in what had happened, anti-Semitism, prejudice against other groups, people doing horrible things, hate crimes, and I was interested through research, but it became a clinical interest and educational, and that's the rest of my career to date. I do education in this area, I do work on the ground helping individuals and families, and I do research. And I've made my best friends and closest friends and even marriage, through this work.
Right.
Which is unusual.
This wasn't one of the questions, and Michael and I made these up, mainly Michael, so you should know.
Yes.
But this is something for me. We got involved with JCRC in New York,
Yes.
and some people in LA. What happened in Philadelphia in terms of Jewish organization?
Yes. Well, one of the founding people for RETIRN is Roberta Eisenberg.
I remember the name.
Yes, and Robbie, as she goes by, was running the cult clinic for the Jewish Family Service in Philadelphia.
Oh.
Another one of our founders was Steve Eisenberg, and Steve Eichel and myself for completeness. So Steve Eisenberg, who was a former cult member, and Robbie were running groups at Jewish Family Service.
I don't know how I missed that,
But over time, there was less support in the Jewish agencies and in the one in Philadelphia to really support that work. So Robbie was very impassioned about it, as you would imagine. She felt personally affected by it, by what had happened to her husband. And so she wanted to do something privately as well. And so she was integral to RETIRN. And the funny thing was Steve met her on television. Everything is unusual when it comes to this work. So they were both invited to be on a television show to talk about cults. And Steve's parents were in the audience. And I stayed home with my baby. So I didn't go. And I joined later that group of people, but we actually met through television in the first instance, which is very funny.
Again, just another aside already. How about lawyers? I remember talking to Marsha Rudin, and I was there myself actually at the time, that the AJC, which is a reform organization, didn't want to touch it. They agreed with the problem, but they didn't want to do anything that would seem to be anti-religious.
Yes, well, there's always a push and pull factor in looking at people's autonomy to make their own choices. Of course, one thing I've never restricted myself to religious groups, but a lot of the groups were religious, and yes, we respect freedom of religion. So really it's about that practice, and as we've often said, they feel the deed, not the creed. Although even that is oversimplified, because we do have ideologically driven violence, so actually the beliefs are important.
Yeah.
But I've seen the Jewish community make mistakes in helping people, because when we started, there was a RETIRN in Philadelphia. There was a lot of concern about Jews for Jesus. And Jews for Jesus targeted Jewish people. And they set up shop across from high schools in Jewish neighborhoods. And even myself, living in Philadelphia, would get literature from them at Christmas time. The hardest time of the year to be Jewish, when you're a bit vulnerable. 1 year for research, I let them send me some materials so I could see what they were up to. So I could see they were really targeting our vulnerabilities, being such a minority at that time of year when it suddenly felt like a religious society that we live in. And so there was a lot of concern about Jews for Jesus, but I had a childhood friend I grew up with who, as a young person, like during university years, went from Judaism to the Church of Scientology, which, of course, whether the Church of Scientology is a religious group or that was for tax reasons is a matter that people have commented on. But his family went to their local synagogue and said, "Can you help us?" And at the time, he was doing some work at the local synagogue. And they said, "Oh, we can't have someone here who's in the Church of Scientology." So they said he wasn't welcome there anymore. And he has spoken about how he felt very rejected by his own religion. And so, if anything, they may have pushed him farther in. Now, there were other Jewish groups doing far better than that. But I am aware of even Jewish groups looking at it as a religious issue. Instead of understanding, it's about people's feelings of belonging, of having a mission, of working towards something more important than themselves. All these issues get involved, and the religion is really kind of a smokescreen. It's not the main thing.
Yeah.
And many of the groups have hidden religious inner circles. So you get into the group, you have no idea it's religious, and you get more and more involved, and then you're told more of the secret ideology, and suddenly you find yourself in a religious group. And we see this today in many of the yoga groups. They look very innocent. Come work out, get in touch with your body, improve your conditioning, and then you end up, perhaps, we have examples of this, of feeling that some man over in Korea is actually like God, and you should be giving all your money to this person.
It makes me think of that New Jersey case with TM.
Yes.
Which I guess is in the news again, I don't know.
It is in the news again because of getting into schools. The groups are very clever.
Yeah.
So they go after, again, vulnerable people, young people.
Yeah.
Get them young,
Yeah.
keep them, So, like I mentioned, Jews for Jesus setting up shop across the street, renting a place across the street from a predominantly Jewish attended school. So you do have this problem, very much so.
Let me move on to how you became involved with ICSA, or I guess it's called ICSA now, huh?
Well, I got involved when it was AFF, American Family Foundation. So I didn't get involved in the very early days, and partly because I had a baby and things. I was a little busy. But International Cultic Studies, American Family Foundation came to do a conference in my hometown, Philadelphia. It was 1997. So by then, I'd been working in the field for quite a while. So I went to my first conference. And I gave a talk about domestic violence as a cult, which I'm still talking about today.
This is
yeah.
very interesting.
I was involved with the Women's Center of Montgomery County. I was actually president of the Women's Center of Montgomery County during a time when there was no shelter for abused people in all of Montgomery County, which is a large county, very sorely needed. So during my time, we helped set up Laurel House, which this year I invited the executive director of Laurel House to come give a talk here. So that's really great. So I've always been involved in the area of domestic violence. And what I noticed was that when someone you knew was hurting you physically, I never saw an instance of that happening where there wasn't psychological manipulation. Something to justify that would keep you in a relationship and not walking out the door. In some kind of way, you were deficient and you had to take the responsibility for it. You were worthless. You had angered them. You didn't do something right. You broke a rule. You were looking at someone else. And so there was tremendous psychological abuse, and I just really could see that happening, and it's not very dissimilar to psychological manipulation that we see in cultic groups, which also quite often have a degree of violence and abuse in them. So we have abuse of power of a cult leader maybe making a lot of money, and then they want to have sex with the people in the group. Not only women, but men too have been sexually abused in many of the groups. Then some of the groups believe, for supposedly religious reasons, in beating children or women. And men have been beaten up in groups. They have physical violence. So the boundaries seem to just fall to the seams, and you're just looking at the same kind of human problems in relationships where there's an abuse of power and influence.
Yeah.
I didn't mention that it was very addictive coming to the conference, because once I started coming, I came every year, and I've been coming every year. I think I missed perhaps 2 in all these years. So it was great, because there aren't that many people working in the area still today amongst my peers in psychology or other mental health professions, and it was really wonderful to share ideas and experience with other people who get it. And so, yeah, I was hooked.
It makes me now ask, have you done anything special to educate your professional peers?
Yes.
Or to bring them in some way?
I make a point of this. I give as many presentations as I possibly can to my colleagues in the professional organizations. So in America, I mentioned the first presentation to the Pennsylvania Psychological Association annual conference, but I gave many over the years on subjects related to cults. But I also gave talks to the regional group, the Eastern Psychological Association, and even the American Psychological Association, which was just my dream in the beginning, that I might possibly get a national audience. So, I mean, you had wonderful people within APA, like Philip Zimbardo, who opened the doors where others of us could really come and talk about these issues, and met him early on, at conferences. But since living in the United Kingdom for the last 15 years, similarly dedicated to this. So I've been presenting to the British Association of Counseling and Psychotherapy annual research conference every year. Not always on cultic issues, but oftentimes it has been. Now, this past year, we've run for the first time a new MSc course in the psychology of coercive control. And the year before, Rod and I have put this program together. We're developing it, and we told our colleagues at the BACP, the British Association of Counseling and Psychotherapy, what we were going to do. Now, this was on the heels of a new law in the UK, which passed in the end of 2015, the Serious Crime Act, which recognized for the first time that psychological violence alone is a serious crime and you can go to prison for it. And the people that were high up in the BACP thought this was really important to what we were doing, the work we were doing, which they were already familiar with, but the new course. So they commissioned Rod and me to write an article in their publication that goes out to all of the members. So it's called Therapy Today, like our ICSA today. And they said, would you write something on coercive control and help counselors in general and psychotherapists to know how to recognize it and what to do about it. So we wrote an article, and we were very pleased because we did not realize they were going to do this, but they made us the cover story. So they've been so supportive and interested, and they've also supported our colleague Julie Jenkinson in the UK to run training workshops for people on how to work with people coming out of cultic groups.
You use the word law.
Yes.
Is it, what level of, are there penalties?
That's a national law, yes,
And
there
what
are
are the
people in
criteria?
prison.
What are the criteria for, because that must be a tough one.
They have a wonderful list of coercive and controlling behaviors. It fits the cultic work perfectly, but that's not who they had in mind when they did it. They had in mind intimate partner relationships. But it's a start, and eventually we're hoping that case law will allow it to be applied to groups as well. So at the moment it's been enforced when you're living with the person, it's your partner.
Right, and the sort of the case is brought, this is a civil,
Yes.
a civil thing, or is it a
No,
a
it's
crime?
a crime.
Okay.
And we just had the first woman sent to prison for coercive control of her partner. We
It's
just
just,
had that case a few months
and
ago.
I wonder how this is adjudicated.
Yes, well, people will present evidence. For example, family members could say, I've not been allowed to see my adult child now for several years. That happened in this last case. But sometimes we see that the psychological coercion precedes physical violence.
Mhm.
So in this case where the woman has gone to prison, there were 4 years of psychological control and 2 years where it also escalated to physical violence. So she actually admitted to it because it was hard to refute it. She had isolated him. She had hurt him physically. She wouldn't allow him to do many things. I'll tell you other ways you can prove it. We have the wonders of technology, and I am in awe of the good that can come of it, but with everything good comes problems. So you can track people on your phone and monitor their every movement. And you could prove that someone had done that someone was watching your every movement. So you can begin to show imprisonment, really, that people are suffering.
Really. How would you characterize your service to AFF/ISAP?
Well, I have volunteered for AFF and ICSA in various ways. I'm on the mental health committee, and I represent the first generation members. So, of course, in the very beginning, we didn't make any of these distinctions, but over the last number of years, we've really had a movement of people who were born and raised in groups and are coming out and who are finding their voice and expressing their own unique needs. But I champion the people that are conned and recruited. And when I say I champion that, every year I give some sort of presentation about counseling issues for first generation former members. So I've been doing that for quite a while. And I'm also on the research committee. And I've been on the various forms we've had of advisory boards. They're in, they're out, they have different names, but I've done that. I've come every year, which is not always easy. As you know, we come at our own expense and our own time, and all of that is difficult, but I've made it a point to come and to give presentations really every year and putting the work into doing that, to sharing my own knowledge and experience as it's evolving. And my understandings have evolved. It's not like I understood it all when I started, nor do I understand it all now. So So I keep learning and I keep trying to update and fit in things that I'm learning with what's happening in general. So this past year, I was very excited by something that happened in the British Psychological Society. So after several years of working on this year they've produced a document on a framework that they call the Power Threat Meaning Framework. And what it is, it can be an alternative to or a supplement to our usual diagnostic criteria, which we base on the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual 5, DSM-5. And the clinical psychologists who belong to the BPS, British Psychological Society, are very concerned about over-pathologizing people and looking at their problems and not their resources and their resiliency and their strengths, and the shame and stigma that comes with having a traditional diagnosis. So they've been looking at this from a number of viewpoints. So there's like a movement around people who hear voices. You say, like, you know, you could call us schizophrenic or psychotic. Maybe we're people that hear voices, and some of these people have become psychologists themselves and are leading on this. And you know what? We have ways of coping with this, where it's not such a big problem. In fact, everybody hears internal dialogue. So it's a question about that not really ruining your life, and people can learn strategies. So out of this type of philosophy, the clinical psychologists in the UK were thinking that people interview their clients, do an evaluation, they're looking for all their symptoms, and they're not saying, what happened to you? What's your story? Let's really listen to that. And they found in listening to people's stories over the years, the thing that was mostly causing people's symptoms was an abuse of power at some point in their lives. Everybody had a story about how power had been abused, so hence the power in the framework. And it's certainly important to find out what the threats are to people that you're working with. And the meaning, I like to think of the meaning as the existential part of what they're doing. How can you find meaning in your experiences, and how are you going to find meaning moving forward? And people do that in very individual ways. I feel in the early days of the field, people were strongly encouraged when they came out of groups to speak out against the groups or to help other people to exit. And that's not right for everyone. For some people, that is a way of finding meaning, and it's really important. And some of our former members have made a career out of helping other people to exit, and that's a wonderful thing. And really, we need more people like that. But it's not for everybody. And furthermore, we shouldn't have an answer to what people do after they leave a group. We should have as many diverse answers as there are people. And it's the same thing when people have experienced abuse in their families. Should they go to court and press charges? Well, of course, everyone should be brought to justice in an ideal world, but the things you have to suffer to go through court, the cross-examination, the facing your perpetrator in a courtroom, you ought to really think that one through, whether that's the right thing for any person in particular. So I think it's really important that people recover in their own unique ways, and we don't tell them what are the right ways. So that meaning can come in different ways. So for some people, it comes out of helping other people to lead. But for other people, they're going to do lots of other interesting things in their lives that are meaningful. For example, maybe they're going to have an open and honest and equal type of relationship with someone, having learned what abuse of power is like. And that's a fantastically meaningful thing to do. Or maybe they're going to find meaning in their work, and their work might have nothing to do with it on the surface, but they're doing something that they're very involved with that's not for the benefit of a leader. It's more true to themselves and their own personal interest. Now they're doing meaningful work. That's a fantastic thing. So we really love this framework, and we've been teaching it to our students in the Coercive Control program and asking them to write essays where they incorporate how can that framework help with recovery. And we're hoping to publish something around this area because we just find it a really, so that's a new new development in the field that we're applying. So I'm always trying to fine-tune my approach and my thinking about how can we help people and incorporate all the good things we're learning about how to help people in general, what helps people to recover from trauma, what is the trauma-focused therapies that are available now. CBT has been adopted. It's become much broader with much more appreciation for the establishment of a therapeutic relationship. And there's now CBT that is focused on trauma recovery. So not everyone has to do that either, but it's important to know about that and to bring it into our work where it's appropriate. Creative therapies. I'm involved in research in helping to use creative therapies to help with symptoms like depression and trauma and anxiety. So there's room to really help people, not just by talking, but helping them. We have the wonderful Phoenix Project, which I'm a fan of. We've had plays written about being in cults. We had a dance performance in the United Kingdom done by Rosie Kay, choreographer, and it was called MK Ultra. And when Rod and I heard there was a dance called MK Ultra, we made it our business to go and to contact the choreographer. And out of that grew an application for a small grant with the ESRC in the United Kingdom, which sponsored an event. It was a public engagement event for the Manchester Festival of Social Science, in which we presented our work. We brought in a psychologist, Dr. Warren Mansell from the University of Manchester, who has done a whole approach to therapy based on control theory, so it tied in nicely with our work. And Rosie Kay came, and she showed clips of her work, and she explained the research behind it and how some people, young people, believe that the CIA is still running MK Ultra and it's conspiracy theories and that their minds are being controlled, and why would they believe that? And she expressed this through the choreography, and even the costumes in this piece of choreography were very colorful but robotic and constrained, and she expressed in movement things that we can't express in words. So it all kind of came together. It was a very exciting program.
Fascinating. Has it been filmed?
Well, she has filmed parts of it, and so she brought her own films and she made a film for our event. But it's a live performance, and it's on tour at the moment in the UK, and it's fantastic.
You don't have to feel that you're going to reveal something that's going to make people unhappy, but do you think ICSA has made any mistakes in terms of the way the programs have developed?
Well, I think ICSA is my favorite organization that's working in this area, and I am involved with a number of them. But I think the conferences have been really great. It's really wonderful in Philadelphia this year to see like a third of the people have never been here before. So I think that's great. We've had our growing pains, and it's hard financially to sustain an organization like this, and we would like to see the government pay for more families to have resources and more individuals to have free psychotherapy, because people come out of groups and have no money, particularly the second generation who've grown up in groups. They come out, they don't have the resources for private help. We'd love to see that happen. So I think that ICSA has done tremendous work in getting the word out there to different kinds of people, the professionals, the families, the former members. Its openness is something that I applaud, where even current members can come and see what we have to say. We have no secrets. We're not a cultic group. I think that's really very positive. And I personally am very interested in the broad areas of coercive control, so I would like to see us grow more in that way. I'm disappointed we've not had more of an impact since 9/11 in helping with radicalization, helping people to come out of terrorist and extreme groups. I'd like to see us incorporate the domestic abuse even more widely. So I'd like us not to be seen so much as a niche group, but the fact that almost everyone is touched by these issues in one way or another, if not themselves, then someone they know and care about.
Do you think funding is possible from municipalities or states in the United States, the way, let's say, InfoSect gets some support from the government? I take it it's the government of Quebec.
Yes, there are governments that have put more money into this. That can be a good thing and not such a good thing at times, because then the government will have certain agendas about what they want you to be working on. So we do have to keep that in mind. But I think we could successfully pursue government and research grants in different areas. And that's the place to start. I think it's probably more realistic that we might get grants for particular projects that we have. Why can't we have a project of going into schools? The cults go into schools, they form front groups, they look all innocent and wonderful. They're going to help work against drug abuse and things like that.
Yeah.
Why can't we get into schools and educate people about what are healthy relationships? What are the warning signs of destructive groups and relationships? Can we not tap into public health funding to do such a thing? So we tend not to be as good at selling ourselves as the groups are.
Yeah, marketing in a sense.
Marketing is something we're kind of shy about, but I would like to see us do more of that.
Is Britain better than the United States in that regard?
I wouldn't really say so, because they have funded certain things, but only, again, out of an agenda of mostly of getting information about particular groups, whereas what excites me is information about the general psychology of what's happening.
Yeah.
And they make mistakes. So, they've had groups manipulate them into getting high-powered police officers showing up at their openings of their glitzy new buildings that they have money for. So things get endorsed. They do, research on mindfulness and meditation without knowing that sometimes those things are great and sometimes they're used as a hook to get people involved in some very nasty things. So governments themselves need to be educated. So you have to get their interest. How do you get their interest? You usually have to find someone that's been burned by a personal experience, and then they're more interested in supporting these kinds of things. There usually has to be a personal consciousness raising experience. And it's humbling when you have that, when you realize the susceptibility that people have. I can share, I've shared publicly in recent years that my father was diagnosed with cancer. So there's hardly anything that would make a person feel more vulnerable. And during that time, he became involved in a health-related cultic group that did not support traditional medicine. And he became obsessively involved with them because he wanted to live more than anything. And they made promises that were ridiculous and absurd. Foolproof ways to never have cancer again, one of which was to not have any fat cells. So he was losing weight to a tremendous degree. His skin was getting bad, etc. And the story I've been sharing is that, of course, I expressed my concerns to him, and he said to me at one point, "Linda, I know I'm in a cult, just leave me alone." So he knew from all my work that maybe this group didn't meet the right criteria, but he felt dependent upon them. And I did eventually get him out of there. It wasn't easy.
Well, that it wasn't.
No.
This brings up a question, not part of this necessarily. Jewish groups.
Yes.
I remember an article about this freelance rabbi who had a harem. This was years ago.
Yes.
But people, accused the Hasidic groups,
Yes,
or some of them, of being cult-like.
there are some problems within the Jewish religion. And we've been involved in trying to help some people with this. So when you see a group that is only educating people religiously, and people come out and have no skills to make a living with, that is an area of concern to me. Being involved in the domestic violence end of things, we did form a Jewish hotline because there's not supposed to be violence at home from nice Jewish husbands. They're not supposed to be alcoholics, and they're not supposed to beat their wives. And sadly, those are stereotypes, and actually these problems cross all lines of ethnicity, socioeconomic status, religion, etc. Even gender, there's female-generated violence. So, but because it's a little harder to speak up, we had like a code. You could call the hotline and ask for Rachel, being a nice biblical name. Now, you wouldn't really get a Rachel to return your call, but you would get a Jewish woman who maybe you felt might understand you better. Now, I'd like to say we did the same thing for the Korean community. So it's about being sensitive to different cultural issues. But there are Jewish groups that have extreme control over their members, and where some terrible things have happened, where people who were homosexual were no longer considered to be suitable parents. And I certainly would object to that. And we had a meeting of some of the Jewish women like myself that were involved in domestic violence, and we had a heart-wrenching discussion about, does it constitute physical abuse to be having many, many babies? Is that an assault to a woman's body? Because as you know, the highly religious Jewish groups believe in having a lot of children. And we were trying to see if we need to be available around these issues, because there are a lot of issues about women feeling in control of their reproduction, and it's an important area that no one wants to talk about. We had to have a secret meeting about. So I'm saying it loud and clear. We have concerns. We think about these things. And it is harder to come forward. So if you go against some of the teachings of the group, you're quite likely to lose custody of your children. And we're following some of these cases and working with some organizations in the UK that are trying to help Jewish people come out of what has become extreme practices in some of the Jewish groups. So that pains me a great deal. I would like to say that's not happening. But it's quite similar to how I feel about psychotherapy cults, which is another area that I got very heavily involved with. I feel very upset with people with professional credentials who then abuse their clients. Many of them will have group therapy as part of what they do, and that's how it becomes cult-like. And then they don't follow basic ethical principles. And they get overly involved in their clients' lives, telling them who they can be with, whether or not they're ready to have sex or need time off, whether or not they've been abused, what kind of work they should do, living with only members of the group, going to only 12-step programs with other members of their group, having specialist knowledge of how to help people where they don't have to follow the ethics, abusing confidentiality, etc. The good thing about these groups is that those professionals are accountable, and I myself have testified against some of my peers, and that has led to them losing their professional credentials.
For the board of...
From the regulatory boards, whatever they were different professionals. Yeah. And that's a hard thing to do. It pains me every time, but it's really important. But it's better than when you go to someone who's not telling you that they're giving you psychological treatment. So we're giving you a personality test. We're telling you about your psychological problems, but we don't have any bounds to confidentiality. If we want to blackmail you with this information, because you're leaving us and we're threatened by you, well, then we will. And so in those cases, you can't sue for malpractice. You can't threaten someone's livelihood. You know, so in the UK, there was concern about a woman who called herself a healer. There's no credentialing to be a healer. I could call myself a healer. Maybe the people my father went to called themselves healers. So it's better, but it's horrible, and it offends me a great deal.